Begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Eruvin Daf Gimel, begin on the bottom line of Daf Beis Beis, where we continue the discussion of the previous Daf regarding the opening halacha of our parak, our Mesechta, regarding the Mavi, when the Kaira, the crossbeam, is there by the Mavi, by the cul-de-sac, by the dead end, that it has to be within 20 amas, where the source of that is. So Shiz corresponds to Bekal Zech Necheskel, to any time, Daf HaChaim. Some of these we're going to be discussing in today's Daf are the concept that there might be things that allow us actually to make the dimensions higher than 20 amas by the opening of the Mavi, because since, like we said, we learned it out from the Pesach HaHeichel according to Rav's interpretation, we'll see that there's something interesting over there that might be a reason why not to, or might yes to, like there was this interesting thing on top of the opening by the Heichel. This year we're going to be discussing a halacha that we said that it has to be within 20 amas by the Mavi and the Sukkah. What's the halacha if part of it is inside and part of it is on top? What's the part of it is within 20 amas and part of it is above 20 amas? What's the halacha going to be over there? Additionally, Rabbi Nachman is going to tell us that although there's many halachas that we talk about amos, an amma is a machlekes, there's different types of amas. There's 6 tvachim amas and there's 5 tvachim amas. Rabbi Nachman is going to tell us that regarding Mavoi and Sukkah, it's one type, and that of Klein is other types of amas. Which actually, machlekes zamarom, in the name of Rabbi Nachman, how to exactly define that. Some key terms and concepts are what's called a malter. A malter is a very interesting, unique type of piece of wood, which even if, let's say, the crossbeam is higher than 20 amas, it's very interesting and it's going to attract your attention, and therefore even above 20 amas, that might be allowed to be used as the kaira because it's going to be catching your attention, which the objective of the kaira is as a heker anyways, as a recognition that this is the end of the Mavi and beginning of the Rosh Hashanah. The pasuk of L'man Yedider Seichem, which is the halachic source of Sukkah, that you have to be able to see the schach, that it has to be within 20 amas, so that you should know that your generations that they stand in Sukkahs too, you have to be able to see the Sukkah. The concept, what's called Kidra de Beishutfi, the pot that's run by partners, L'chamim v'le'kariri. It's neither hot nor cold, because when you give something to a group of people, no one's going to do it, because everyone's going to be relying on someone else to take care of that thing. And finally, Deif and Akuma is the concept that even if, let's say, you have non-kosher schach, but in the middle you have kosher, we view the walls as if it's a bent wall, halachically, and therefore if it's within daled amos of the wall, we view that as a bent wall. So therefore it's going to be kosher, because although the schach has to be touching the wall, and there's not, because it's non-kosher schach, we view the wall as if it's bent for an amount of daled amos. So begin the current daf, Daf Beis Beis, the last 2 words on the daf. The Gemara is in the middle of questioning the opinion of Rav. Rav had said that we didn't know the source of that from the Rabbanan, that you could only have the crossbeam width up until 20 amas, but not higher than that. He said you know it from the Heichel. Just like the sanctuary, the entryway was a height of 20 amas, so too, that's how, what's called a Pesach, an entryway, and that's, you can have the crossbeam only up until there. And that the Gemara continues to ask on Rav, if that's the case, you continue to Gimel and Aleph, like Tahani Le'a Maltera, so that a Maltera should not be effective to validate the height more than 20 amas. The Gemara later on is going to explain this concept of Maya Maltera, what exactly it is, to say that how do you know that it actually is effective. But first the Gemara says that it shouldn't be effective. And we're going to say that it was, but it shouldn't be. Why? Because the Heichel, what do you have by the Heichel? A Maltera Havile. The Heichel actually had these amaltras. We'll explain shortly what that was, but it had on top of the Heichel these amaltras. And even so, Esther Mamahu, the Gevaya, the Heichel itself was only up until a height of 20 amas, and not more than that. So you see that a maltra doesn't let you be more, because where you're learning out Pesach from the Heichel, and that's up until 20, and it itself had a maltra. So how could a maltra help you be higher than 20 amas? Where do we find this concept? It's not like in the Mishnah Masechtas Midas, which talks about the measurements of the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash. So it says Chamesh Amal Taroy Shel Mila. There were these 5 different beams of oak wood that was Hayu Al Gabav, like you see in this picture, that was on top of the entryway of the Heichel. Zulam Al Mazu, one above the other one. Zulam Al Mazu, and the other one on top of the other one. So that's the question. So you see, even though it was up until 20 amas, even though it had a maltra, so how could a maltra let you say, oh, a maltra, oh, and people will see it, lets me, well, what do you mean, the source we're learning out from had a maltra, and it's only up until 20 amas. So how could you let it be higher than 20 amas if it has a maltra? So says the Gemara, wait a second, how am I to you? What type of question is this? Dilmaki Tanya he demalterais. Maybe where do we find that there were these amalterais in the Beis Hamikdash? But ulam Tanya. Maybe that was talking about by the antechamber. When you walked into the Beis Hamikdash, you didn't walk right into the sanctuary. You walked into an antechamber, it's like a hallway, which is called the ulam. The ulam on the outside had these amalterais. The Heichel didn't necessarily have that, and if it didn't have it, maybe if it would have it, it would allow it to be higher than 20 amas. The 20 amas was limited because it did not have a malterais. Which the Gemara responds back to the question. It says, what type of question is this? And when we're saying maybe, the Mefarshim explained it, we could presume that it's like this. Maybe the structure of the heichel was ketabnis ulam, like it was like the structure of the ulam, and therefore, since it's logical to say like that, we could presume that just like there was a malterais on top of the ulam, there was a malterais also on top of the heichel. The reason why this question makes sense is a taisus on the previous stuff that also makes it sound like that we would make the heichel exactly like the ulam. And that's why we had this question to say that, why are we making it only this width and not like the width of the ulam? So we're presuming that it's the same. So now we're going back to the question. Because now that we do find that Amal Torah is effective according to Rav, as the Gemara is going to ask, so why did we originally not let this until, the Gemara first wanted to reject the questioner. So now we finish off the question. So this is Rav's own teaching. So there's two teachings in this statement. Again, I like to put out in Talmudic style, we can get confused sometimes. There's just two teachings. The second teaching we're going to ask from, and it's Rav himself. The first teaching is just parenthetical because it's all was Rabbi Lo in the name of Rav. The first teaching is if there was a crossbeam that was Rechava Dalet, that had a width of 4 tfachim. So again, you put the crossbeam on top of the mavoi. If it was 4 tfachim thick in its width, so then afapi, not thick in its width, afapi, even though it's thin, even though it's not really so strong to receive a half a brick on top of it, it's not that strong, it's not that sturdy, it's still going to be kosher. Because as Rashi explains, although there's a Mishnah that Gimel and Beis says that the krayer, the crossbeam, has to be strong enough that you could put a half a brick in it and it won't break, that's only when, and that's what Rav's teaching is coming to say, only if it's not 4 tzvachim wide. If it's 4 tzvachim wide, that's the first of Rav's halachas, it's okay, it doesn't have to be that strong because it's that wide. The second halach is where the question is coming from. V'miyeshla Amal Torah, says Rav, there's two teachings Rav saying they're both leniencies. And if there's an Amal Torah on top of the mavoi, I feel like then even if the crossbeam is higher than 20 amas, you don't have to diminish it. Wait a second. You said, Rav, that where do you know out the halacha of a mavoi from? You know it from the heichel. The heichel, like we said, was up until 20 amas, even the had Amal Torah. So how could you say Amal Torah, this, what we're going to explain shortly what it is going to let you even more than 20 amas, if the source where you're learning out from had Amal Torah is? So Rabbi Yosef, he says that actually Amal Torah, this that we're bringing from the Brisa that we brought in the name of Rav. So Rabbi Yosef says actually it wasn't Rav who said it. So you can't ask a contradiction Rav on Rav, because actually Masnitnahi, this teaching of the Amal Torah that it is effective even higher than 20 amas is going like a Brisa. You're right. Rav himself would hold it would be invalid even with Amal Torah because we learned from the Heichel. The Heichel itself had Amal Torah and it was limited to 20 amas. So you're right. It's not Rav. It was really a Brisa. So on that asks the Gemara, wait a second. It's actually a very interesting wording that you don't usually find in Shas, the way it's going to ask the question. Essentially, it's about to ask, okay, so it's a Brisa. A Brisa is difficult. The Tana is going to be difficult on a Rav. Mankatanilo, who taught this Brisa? Amar Abaye says, he taught this Brisa, meaning it's an authoritative Brisa. So you're back to the question. So let a Maltra be a Brisa, but take Rav. And that's going to be difficult on Rav, because here we see from the Brisa that the Rabbanan do not learn out the halacha of Maveh from a Heichel. How do we know they don't learn out from a Heichel? Because they said a Maltra is going to be effective higher than 20 amas. If you were learning out from the Heichel itself had a Maltra and it was only effective up until 20 amas. So how could you say that it's effective? Obviously not learning out from the Heichel. That's difficult on Rav, who says that you're learning out from the Heichel. Rav would tell you, no, Dala no Mahach. He says, take me out of the equation. Make believe I didn't say anything. You would still have a difficulty. Wouldn't you have a difficulty in the Brisa themselves? Because we had a Brisa on the previous Daf that said that if you have a Mobay that the crossbeam is higher than 20 amas. And the wording was, which actually Rav Chizd had said that was what misled Rav, but we're going in Rav's interpretation. The words of the Brisa were Yosim Pischel Shel Heichel. If it's higher than 20 amas, which is higher than the opening of the Heichel, then it's going to be possible. So it says Rav, from that Brisa you see clearly that the Rabbanan learned from the Heichel the source. So, and this Brisa is saying obviously that they don't learn that from the Heichel because it's saying if it has a malter, it's kosher higher than 20 amas. What do you mean? How can it be kosher higher than 20 amas? The Heichel itself had a malter and it wasn't kosher higher than 20 amas. So how can the Brisa say? Obviously, says the Gemara. So what do you have to say? Tanoi, it's a machlek Tanoim. The Tana, the previous Daf held like the way Rav understands that Rabbanan learned out from the Heichel. That's why it said it was higher than the entry of the Heichel. It's going to be possible. And therefore, you're right, a maltra is not going to be effective. It's not going to help you because the Heichel itself had a maltra and it didn't help higher than 20 amas. This time that you're quoting now holds that they didn't learn it off from the Heichel, and therefore a matzah would be effective to make it kosher higher than 20 amas. So the Didi Nami Tanoi says, forget about what are you asking on me? There's obviously Machalekes Tanoim. I also hold some Machalekes Tanoim, and I hold like the Tana, the previous Bryce, from the Bryce, the previous Daf, that learns off from the Heichel, and therefore a matzah is not going to be effective higher than 20 amas. So that's one version. The way Rabbi Yosef says it for Rav, that the first Bryce does not derive from the Heichel, the second Bryce does derive from the Heichel, and Rav is one of those Tanoim. But on that says the Gemara of Nachman Yitzchak, he says no. Below Rav, without Rav. In other words, if Rav would not have explained the first Brysa and learned out from there his source, that according to Rabbanan you're learning out from the Heichel, because that was the words of the first Brysa that says, it's higher than 20 hours, higher than the dimension of the Heichel, then it's going to be possible. Without Rav, Masniyasa Adadi Loikash. I'm not sure what he's saying. We wouldn't say that it's a machlekes tanoim between the Tana the Bryce of the previous stuff and the Tana the Bryce over here that says Amalter is going to be kosher. You know why? Because it actually says Rav Nachman by Yitzchak l'Rabbanan according to Rabbanan current time amai. What's the reason why? And we're going to go at greater length on the next daf regarding the definition of how the mechanics of Kair works. But the way the Gemara is saying over here is the crossbeam itself. Why does it have to be within 20 amas? Mishum hekera, because of a recognition. Meaning that people should be able to see it, and they'll know that there was some type of a takana done over here that you shouldn't confuse it with the Rosh Hashanah. So that's why a malter is effective, because since people are going to be looking, even if it's higher than 20 amas, there's still a hecker. You find some flashy billboard, people are looking, no matter how high it is, something catches your eye, so it's going to be a hecker even higher than 20 amas. So the Haidik Tani said, and this that we learned in the first Bryce on the previous daf, that said these words, which again misled Rav. Yes, in the Pishche shall have Heichel, if it's higher than 20 amas, more than the opening of the Heichel, it's not because you learn out from the Heichel, rather Simana ba'alma. It's just a sign, a mnemonic, to recall, not to confuse your teaching regarding 20 amas. And you might say, it's higher than 30 amas, what was it again that my Rebbe said? 40 amas. No, you'll remember because it was like the Pesach of the Heichel. Just like the Pesach Heichel, every child who learns Mishnayos knows that it's 20 amas. It's an easy dimension to remember. Therefore, they said yes in Pesach Shaleichel, but it's not like that was the source of the halacha. Everyone agrees it's not Pesach Shaleichel, and the malter is going to be kosher because it's going to be a hecker even higher than 20 amas. The reason why they used the Pesach Shaleichel was just as a sign to remember the teaching, and therefore, so the Nachman Yitzchak, not like Rav, you would not have the difficulty. You wouldn't have to say it's a machlekes tanoim. It's not being learned on the Pesach Shaleichel at all. But now the Gemara asks, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, according to him, that he's saying that the source of 20 amas is not because you learn it from the Pesach Shaleichel. It's simply because that's where usually people's eyes only go to. You only see it until 20 amas, so therefore that's going to be the objective of the Kaira. So then he has the following question. The Gemara asks under Nachman Yitzchak. We understand if he does not hold like this teaching of Rabbah, which as we'll see in the beginning of Masechet Sukkah, there's a three-way machlekes regarding why does the Sukkah have to be within 20 amas. So if he doesn't hold like Rabbah, we understand what he's saying over here in our Masechta regarding the Mavai. There's a machlekes in the Mishnah if the crossbeam has to be within 20 amas. Now, Eli Isri had the Rabbah, but if he holds like Rabbah, which the reasoning of the Rabbanan by Sukkah is going to be the same reason because of a hecker. The Amar Rabbah, the Rabbah says, it says in the pasuk in Vayikra L'man Yedu Dereseichem that your generation should know keep a Sukkah Shabti that I placed them in tents in the midbar, so therefore you have to sit in the Sukkah. So Rabbah explains, he says, the reason why Schach is possible higher than 20 amas is because Adesem Amma Adam Yidei Shadeh B'Sukkah. Up until 20 amas, a person knows he's sitting in the Sukkah. L'malam Esem Amma, in a Yidei. If the Schach is higher than 20 amas, you don't even know you're sitting in the Sukkah. Why? A person's eye doesn't dominate that height of 20 amas. You don't see it. It's not in your field of vision. So Amma, you see, Sukkah Nami, that by the laws of Sukkah is also Beker Pligi. Their machlekes is over there too. If the schach has to be within 20 amas or not, is because you recognize it or not. So if Lugi Betarti Lamali. So if he holds like Rabbah, that's the reason, because again, there's a machlekes why schach, if it's higher than 20 amas, is kosher apostle, is the diras ari, diras kva. One interpretation is do your eye see it or not? So according to Nachman Yitzchak, why do you need a machlekes of Yehuda and Rabbanan in the same idea in two places? It's the same machlekes. So we know your eyes only go that high. So I know if let's say by Sukkah it's going to be pasal mal b'chot, I would know here too. If he doesn't hold like Rabbah, so you never find anywhere else machlekes regarding hecker. But if you hold like Rabbah, so why is he saying this teaching over here? It's Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan disagreeing in the same idea, just in two different contexts. Says the Gemara, Shricha, no, it's necessary. Why? Because the Iyashmi inon gabi Sukkah, if we told you that Allah only regarding Sukkah, that's why I would say Rabbi Yehuda holds it's going to be kosher, keeping the yeshiva avida. What do you do in the Sukkah? You're sitting. Shalta be'ena. Anyone who's been in class knows. You start, your eyes start looking around. You start So if you're sitting, you might be able to see it. So they're even higher than 20 amas. You'll know you're sitting in the sukkah. But regarding a mavoi in the alleyway, the lehilachabed is meant to walk. Whoever's walking is not generally looking high up in the sky, or else he's going to bump into some garbage. In Rabbanan, I would say he agrees to Rabbanan. It's going to be possible higher than 20 amas. Therefore, we have to say the machlek is also regarding the laws of mavoi, and so to the opposite. Had we only said the machlek is here in our after regarding mavoi, I would say over there the Rabbanan say it's going to be possible. But by a sukkah where you're sitting, I would say they agree to Rabbi Yehuda that yes, even higher than 20 amas, your eyes will end up noticing, oh, of course we're sitting in the sukkah, kindlech, oh, this is what Hashem did for our forefathers. So truthfully, you have to say that even over there, they hold it's going to be possible. That's why you have to say the machlekes in both contexts, even though both of them are about the concept of l'shol be'ein l'mal mochav, that your eyes don't see higher than 20 amas. Now, as we mentioned, we were talking about up until now, a maltra. So it says the Gemara, Maya maltra. What is this a maltra that we were saying that if it's higher than 20 amas, at least according to some, it's going to be kosher even though it's higher than 20 amas, and we said that the heichel itself had this amaltra. So says the Gemara, Rav Chaim Rabbi Baravu Amma, he says that it's kine, some type of nest. Interesting, like nests of birds were protruding out of the wall of the ulam above the entryway. So it's like it was not necessarily a nest for birds, but it had that shape of a nest. Now, a different interpretation, he says that Ami B'Marav in the west, in Eretz Yisrael, they said it was paski da arzi. It was these poles made out of cedar that were very long, that were stuck into the wall. And according to the Gemara's Havmin at least, since the poles are very long, so people would see it, and therefore it was a hecker, like we have these pictures that they although it's above 20 amas, but people would notice it. So the Gemara explains now, according to either interpretation, Mandam and Piski Da'arz is the one that says that because they were these poles, that was the hecker for Malvi Koshken Kine. For sure he would hold that if you have these types of nests, since it's very chashiv, and it's something that's like very interesting that you have these nests, so people would look at it and for sure you notice the kaira, the crossbeam, even above 20 amas. But Mandam Akini, the one who says that it's these nests, of a Piska Da'arz, but just regular poles, not necessarily what people notice, and therefore that Manda Amma would hold is not going to be kosher, these poles of cedar above 20 amas. But then the Gemara asks, Mandam a Piska Da'arz, but according to the one that holds that it's these cedar poles, my time, what's the reason that it's going to be valid above 20 amas? Obviously, like we're assuming, it's Mishum B'Nafish Mishcha because it has a very long length. So since it's very long, so then you'll notice it even above 20 amas. But then the question is, but the nafish mishcha, but the sukkah, the schach, is also very long, right? You're sitting in the sukkah, obviously if it's very high, it's probably built very long, and it's also very long. Yet the Kamir Abandallah, you still want to say that it's above 20 amas, it's not going to be kosher. So why is it any different than the mavoi of the cedar poles that's long, that's going to be kosher? So the Gemara says, you're right. Even the kachashav, the reason of the cedar poles, not just because they're long, is because they're very distinguished. They're made out of cedar. So it's the color, so there's word about it, and people say, oh yeah, it's interesting, why? You saw what they did over here? And that's why, because it's chashav, not just because it's long. Just being long doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to pay attention to that. Now the Gemara continues with an interesting question regarding this halacha, the Mishnah, that the Eruv has to be, and that we said regarding sukkah, that has to be within 20 amas. So the Gemara says, let's say like this, let's say miktzas, let's say some of the thickness of the kaira of the crossbeam is b'toiches, is within 20 amas. Umiktzas kaira l'mal me'esrim, and some of the thickness is above 20 amas. Remember, it has to be within 20 amas. Let's say some is within and some is above. And so too regarding the thickness of the schach of the sukkah. Miktzas schach, some of the schach is b'toiches, is within 20 amas. Umiktzas schach l'mal me'esrim is above 20 amas. What's the halacha? So it's interesting, we have actually two different versions of this halacha, and we're going to explain with two interpretations of each version why it would be like that. Amar Rabba says, the mavoi kosher, by a mavoi, that case is going to be kosher, it's going to be valid. The sukkah possible, but the sukkah is going to be invalid. So the Gemara wonders, what?
What did we assume till now? That the kaira is below 20? That the top of the kaira is 20?
So it's a good question. We didn't really assume anything here. We just said it has to be within 20 amas. But let's say it was within 20 amas.
Otherwise there would be no question, I guess.
Which one? If it's some is above, some is below? Does the whole,
but
does the beam...
The bottom of the kaira is 20 amas.
So we'll see in the Gemara's discussion, what do we discuss? We're talking about the pole has to be within 20 amas? Or does the airspace have to be 20 amas? Right, because if it's the pole, then it would be possible, because it's not all inside 20 amas. Or does the pole, or just the recognition of the pole, is the pole as mechitza, is the pole as a hecker? We'll see a greater length.
Does it have a shiur, the thickness of how much?
Right, so it does have a shiur, right. Both the schach and the pole has it, but regarding its strength and its measurements. So we'll see. We're going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but the Gemara is going to explain to us at least some of this relevancy, and the next stuff even at more length regarding the understanding of the lumdus of how the kaira actually functions. So Rabbi first says, "B'mother kasha, by mother to be kasha, b'sukkah possible, b'sukkah to be possible." So says the Gemara, and the Gemara goes through this discussion two times. It says, wait a second. Maishna b'mavi kasha. Why would you say by mavi it's kasha? This is a little bit what you're alluding to. Why would it be kasha by mavi? Because in the kolish, you say that we thin it out. You would say as if, okay, see that part of the thickness that's on the top, as if it's not there. So you have a thinner beam, and it's all going to be within 20 amas. What's the problem? So says the Gemara then sukkah nami limaklosh. Why don't you say something about the sukkah? Make believe the schach on top is not there. And you thin it out, and then you have the sukkah within 20 amas. What's the difference? Oh, says the Gemara, no. If you're going to say that by the schach you thin it out, you make believe as if that upper schach is not there. There's a halacha we'll get to by the Masechet Sukkah that you have to have more shade than sunlight. So you have to have some thickness to the schach. Because if you thin it out very much, the Tosfos discusses if it's really thinner or just the wind's going to blow it away. But the point is you can have more sun than shade, and then it's going to be puzzle. So you can't say you view it as if it's thinned out. If you view it as thinned out, the sun's going to come in. You can have more. It's going to be puzzled that way. So he's going, wait a second, then here also by the Mavoi, if you're going to say thin out the thickness of the crossbeam, this is a crossbeam that can be moved by the wind, where the Chacham had made a measurement that has to be bria, has to be strong, that it could receive a half a brick. If not, the wind's going to blow it away. It's not significant. So there also, if you're going to say thin it out, it's not going to be valid because the wind's going to blow away that crossbeam. Or rather, what do you have to say? And this is just, we're going back and forth. What do you have to say? Oh, even if we're thinning it out, we'll view it as if it's poles of metal. Poles of metal, even very thin, are not going to be moved. They go back the other way. Then we have to view it that as if it was more shade than sun. Even though you're thinning it out, view it as something that blocks out the sun, even when it's a very thin sheet. Because just like you're saying over there, we view it like metal poles. So view like here also. In other words, basically the Gemara is saying, what's the logic to differentiate between Mavli and Sukkah? The same logic that you're going to say for either one, say for the other one. And what you say doesn't work by the other one, should also not work by the other one. So on that, Rabbi Mepazaki says like this. This is the first of the two interpretations. He says, Sukkah, the liyachidi. Sukkah, every person has his own Sukkah. So le'midker, he's not going to remember. In other words, sometimes the part of the thickness of the sukkah that's in the 20 amas, that's going to be not there anymore. And it's all going to be above 20 amas, which is going to be puzzle, since the person's not going to realize. So then we said that if some is in and some is out, we're not validating. Because how do you know? Over sukkahs, or whatever it is, some of this lower schach might fall out. You made it with these palm fronds and it falls out. And you only have on top, it's a puzzle sukkah. So therefore he said it's puzzle. That's the public. Mitkar adodi. They can remind each other. You always have that one guy in the community says, excuse me, did you check? Did you do? You always have somebody. And therefore, if the lower part of the beam is going to deteriorate and all of it is going to be above 20 amas, they're going to fix it. That's interpretation number one. Why? But mother kasha, mother puzzle. Ravina Nami gives a second interpretation. Sukkah deraisa. Sukkah is a biblical halacha. It's a mitzvah deraisa, and one of the Torah mitzvahs. Sachmir Rabban, the Rabban were stringent. They said part in, part out. We're not saying it's not going to be valid. But Mavi, the Rabban, the whole Mavi is rabbinic law. According to biblical law, you're allowed to carry in the Mavi. So Lachmir Rabban, so Rabban were not so stringent. So ultimately, Lamais is kosher. Part of it is in the 20 amas. We're not concerned that, let's say, it's going to decompose, deteriorate, and it's only going to be above. Since it's rabbinic, we're lenient. That's one version. Now, what's interesting, it says the Gemara, Ravada Bamasna Masnila Hoshmaita the Rabbi Ibcha. He teaches the teaching of Rabbi the exact opposite. That actually, Amar Rabbi says, B'mavi puzzle, B'sukkah ksher. The exact opposite. The first version said that B'sukkah is going to be puzzle and Mavi is going to be kosher. The second version says the opposite. Mavi is the one that's puzzle and B'sukkah is going to be kosher. So here also we'll go through the conversations, so don't get lost. It's the same windshield wiper. Maishna Sukkah the ksher. Why is it by Sukkah is going to be kosher? I mean, in Kalesh, because you say, okay, why isn't it a kosher Sukkah? View it as if it's thinned out, and that we view the upper schach as if it's not there, and it's all within 20 amas. So the Mava now the kosher. By the Mava you should also say thin it out. The crossbeam is all within 20 amas because the upper part view it as if it's not there. Oh no, if you would say that the Mava, the crossbeam is thinned out, have the karna tells Baruch. It's a crossbeam that the wind can blow it away. It's flimsy. It's not going to be good enough to be as a kaira. So the Chanami says in the Obi by Sukkah, if you thin it out, have the chamas and rumitzulasa. It's going to have more sun than shade. Rather, what do you have to say? Why are you going to say it's valid by sukkah? Because obviously that right now you have more shade than sun. So nasas tilasa mirbuchamasa. So even though we're going to say we view it, it's not like we're taking it away. We're still going to say that it's going to remain with its shade that's more than the sun. So then here also, here also you should also consider significant as if it's heavy metal beams. Because even if you're going to thin it out, it's not that the wind's going to really blow it away. You're not taking away anything. You're just saying, right, we view it. So if you're just viewing it, so it still maintained its original strength, which it's pretty thick beam, so then it should still be kosher by Mavi too. So then Rabbi Mepazaki says the following two similar answers, but the opposite. It's interesting. It's the same ideas, but the exact opposite. Sukkah dil yachad, he words for an individual. Rami anafshi mitka. They say you want to get something done, you got to do it yourself. If you're the only one in charge, you're going to be in charge and focused, and you're going to make sure to remember to do it, and you're going to make sure that it doesn't become above 20 hours. But a mavoi, where that's the whole community, it's the shul's thing, it's a communal thing. Everyone's going to rely on the other person. No one's going to remember to do it. That's what people say. A pot that's being run by partners. It's not hot, it's not cold. No one's doing anything because he's saying, "Oh, he's going to do it," and he's going to do it, he's going to do it, and nobody does anything. So actually, by mavoi, it's going to be puzzle because no one's going to make sure. But by a sukkah, you're going to look out for it because it's your responsibility. The second interpretation, Rabbi Shloimy says, again, it's the same idea but the exact opposite. Sukkah de'oraisa, sukkah which is biblical, we don't need to have a strengthening of that because it's biblical. Everyone's very careful with biblical law. So therefore, we're going to allow it to be partly in, partly out. It has to be strengthened. People are more lax regarding rabbinic law, and therefore, that's why by Mavai it's going to be possible because we say, it's a rabbinic, and you can say, rabbinic, okay, whatever, you're not going to be so careful. Therefore, we say, no, it's going to be possible when it's partly in and partly out. But then the Gemara says, okay, my halacha. So we had this big different interpretations or whatever. What was the conclusion regarding this halacha of the kaira and the schach, where part is in and part is above 20 amos? What's the halacha? So we have a machlekes over here. Rabbi Ula Amar, he says zev is apostle. Says both apostle, which is the Mefarshim explained because he doesn't say that nasis. In other words, the only way it's kosher is like you do it. It's not here, and it's not here. So then we consider it's a flimsy one, and it's mitzvah. Both cases by the sukkah and the mav are going to be apostle. Rav Amar says, and this is a very important opinion. He says zev is kosher. He says both of them are kosher. And the reason for that is between them days because halal sukkah. This answers the question that was brought up before. When we learn in the Mishnah regarding sukkah, it's the ear space, and halal mavitnan by the mavit also the ear space. In other words, this that we mentioned has to be 20 amas by the mav in the sukkah is in the ear space. It's not going on the kaira. We don't care if the beam is above 20 amas. The main thing is that in the ear space can't be 20 amas. You have to have at least the schach start or the mavi start within 20 amas. So therefore, that's why it's going to be kosher, because we don't care that it extends above. Who cares? The main idea is that the ear space is not 20 amas because of shalta be'ein or whatever it is. So therefore, that's why Rabbi says that's going to be kosher. On that, only Rabbi says Tanya de Baselach. He says I have a brisa that says like you that it depends on the ear space. He says, you know why? Because the brisa says mavishu geboim esem amma. If you have a mavoi, that's higher than 20 amas. And we taught this in the previous daf. Yishim pesach shalecha, more than the opening of the hechel. Yemaya, you should lower it. Now, the hechel gufay, the hechel itself, which if you hold like Rav, you're actually learning out from the hechel. But even if you're just using it as a simon, the hechel itself, chalalei asrim. The hechel extended upwards the entryway. It's just that the airspace was within 20 amas. So you see, it's the airspace and not the thing itself. The curry could be above 20 amas. The schach could be above 20 amas as long as the airspace is not 20 amas. So as long as it starts right by the edge of 20 amas, it's going to be okay, and then it's going to be kosher. But Eisver of Simin bar Rav Ashler Papa, he asks on him from the following brisa. The brisa says, "Ketzad haya'isa." How exactly was this done? It says in the brisa, "Maniach kaira misvas esrim alamata." How does this work with the crossbeam? You put the crossbeam at the edge of 20 amas and below. In other words, it sounds like that the thickness of the beam has to be within 20 amas because you place the beam from the edge of 20 and below. It sounds like it's got to be in. The beam itself has to be within 20 amas. That contradicts what you just said, that it doesn't have to be the beam itself, just the ear space. And that says the Gemara, even though say ilamala, right? They say that it's not 20 amas and below, 20 amas and above. So on that the Gemara says, no, come on, it doesn't say in above, it says below. On that says the Gemara, you're right. This will come in to teach us. The lamata kilamal, when the minimum height is like the maximum height. Meaning mala, just like above, which is the maximum height. Chalola esrim, we're talking about that the ear space is 20 amas. Aflamata, also below, meaning the minimum measurement, chalola asara. The ear space has to be 10 tefachim, meaning there's two measurements. There's a minimum and there's a maximum. Up until now, we speak about the maximum, saying it can't be higher than 20 amas. Now, the Chacham gave a measurement also regarding the minimum height of the entryway of a mavli, which is 10 tefachim. It's on that ear space that we're saying that has the same measurement as 20 amas and above. So if you have to read the brisa, the Rashi explains, it's talking about you put the crossbeam at the edge of 20 amas and above. It doesn't say the word olmala, but that's what it means and above. When it says lamata, it means and lamata. Meaning, if you're coming to make it as low as possible, then you have to make the edge, the pole at the edge of 10 tefachim and above, but it cannot be within 10 tefachim because the ear space then won't be a valid mavai. So it's lamata is a different case. It's just telling that the minimum height of the kaira is going to be 10 tefachim. So again, lamata doesn't mean and below. It's a different case. It means just like above, we're saying it has to be 20 amas. So to below, it can't be lower than 10 tefachim. Now we continue and we end off with this concept, which we spoke about the halach of 20 amas by sukkah. We spoke about by mavai. So now there's two versions, but the first one is Amar Baya. He says Mishmid Rav Nachman. He says amas sukkah. The amas that we talk about by sukkah, the amas mavai. We talk about the laws of amma by a mavai. We mentioned by both of them the laws of an amma. That an amma is like around like the maximum of like 2 feet. It's like the distance of your middle finger to your elbow. That's ba'am bas chamisha. Those were 5 tefachim amas. The tefach is a handbreadth. So if you put 5 of them together, that is those amas of sukkah and mavai, which are smaller amas. Whereas amas kalayim, when we talk about the laws of kalayim, a forbidden mixture of a vineyard and some other planting, that's ba'ama bas shisha. That's 6 tefachim amas. Another tefach for that amma, what's called the larger amas. And the Gemara later on is going to explain what that is. But what Rav Nachman Yitzchak is coming to say is that some are smaller amas and some are bigger. So as Rashi explains, obviously he means to say we're going to go stringent in either one, because if it's not stringent, how could he say that idea that some are bigger, some are smaller? It doesn't say anywhere that there's that measurement. So obviously he's coming to say we have to be machmir. There's 2 types of amas. There's the smaller amma and the larger amma. By Kalayim, we're going to say that they're bigger, and by Mavai and by Sukkah, we say that they're going to be smaller, because that's a stringency on whichever cases those are. So therefore, the Gemara wants to explain each one now. Amas Mavai, but Amma Bas Chamishi, tell me by the Mavai, the Amas are 5 Tvachim Amas. Lamai Hilchasa, for what halacha are you telling me that you're going to measure the Amas by a Mavai, by the smaller Amas, which is going to be a stringency? Says the Gemara, that's the halacha we're talking about up until now. L'goyvai, regarding the height. You said the opening halach of this Masech that there's 20 amas that's going to be invalid. So once it reaches already the smaller 20 amas, it's going to be invalid if you make it higher than that. So that's 5 tefachim amas, which is smaller than the 6 tefachim amas. That's what we're saying. It's a stringency by the laws of Mavai. There's one other halacha. This is a little bit complicated. So if you start noticing yourself drifting off, just notice, because we're talking about big concepts, we're just touching on it, because we just want to mention this idea that the amas of Mavai and Sukkah are the 5 tvachim and it has to be a stringency, whereas by Klein it's the 6, but each one of these are complicated sugyas, so forgive yourself if you're starting to get a little bit watery in the brain. But the second halacha is Pirtzas Mavai. Pirtzas Mavai is a breach by the Mavai, which the Gemara tells us later on in this parak, that if you have a breach in a Mavai more than 10 amas, it invalidates the Mavai. And that Rav Nachman is coming to say that those 10 amas are small amas, so it's a stringency. Even a smaller breach is going to be possible. Fine, those are the 2 areas where we find that if you're using the 5 12 amas, it's a stringency by the laws of Mavai. But says the Gemara, wait a second, but ve'ikar, there are certain amas that are mentioned by a meshach Mavai. How long does a Mavai have to be to qualify as a Mavai? Meaning, what makes something into Chatzar? What makes something into Mavai? So the length of the Mavai has to be ba'arba amas. In other words, if let's say the area is less than 4 amas, Abaya says that's not a valid Mavai. As the Gemara brings later on, Daf Yomi and Aleph. Where the Gemara says if let's say the height of the Mavai is less than 10 tefachim, and you're coming to full the height, you have to make the height, you're coming to dig out, how much do you have to dig out in a certain length? Rabbi Yosef says only 4 tefachim. Abai says no, you have to dig out an area of 4 amas, because the Mavai in its length has to be daled amas. That says the Gemara, those amas, according to Rav Nachman, are dilakula. It's a leniency, because that means to say you're validating the Mavai by smaller amas. Because it's a leniency to be a Mavai, because then you could have a Kair or Lecha, it could be valid. You could go ahead and do certain things that if it wasn't a Mavai, you wouldn't be able to do. So you see that it's a leniency by, you're saying that, we're saying it's stringency by the amas ketanas. It's a leniency by the meshach of the Mavai. Says the Gemara, no, Kamam da Amar. Nachman's going like the opinion that says that the length of a Mavai is ba'arba tefach. There's only 4 handbreadth. That's how Rav Nachman holds, because it's a machlekes of Abai and Rav Yosef. How long does the length of a Mavai have to be? He holds like the interpretation that holds it's 4 tefachim. So therefore, it was never mentioned the concept of amrit regarding the length. It was only mentioned 4 tefachim. So therefore, that's one answer. So it's never going to come out as leniency. Over by some, if you want, you could say that actually you're right. The length of the Mavai is ba'arba amas, is 4 amas. So wait a second, is that a leniency? You're right, but v'roiv amas. When we were talking about the majority of amas that I mentioned by Mavai, that's what Rav Nachman was saying, that's going to be the small amas. And it wasn't going on all the amas of the Mavai, because he was only saying it's a stringency. You're right, regarding the length of the Mavai, that would have to be the amas that are 6 tvachim amas to be a valid Mavai. That's the two different interpretations stand. Now the Gemara continues to ask, okay, so you just explained to me the Amos of the Mavi. You said that regarding the halacha of the height and regarding the breach of the Mavi, that those Amos are 5 Tvachim Amos, and that's a stringency. And regarding the one that's the length of the Mavi, either you said that actually it's not an Amos, that's 4 Tvachim, or you said you're right, Roiv Amos Kama. Let's go to the next case. Amos Sukkah. The Amos of a Sukkah. The Amos Bas Chamisha, those are 5 Tvachim Amos. Why is that a stringency when you take 5 handbreadth, you put it together, that's the Amma, that's going to be a stringency in the laws of Sukkah. Says the one that's Legoiva, that's what we mentioned also for regarding the laws of Sukkah, for the height, that we said if it's above 20 Amma, it's going to be possible, that's a stringency because that's a smaller height that you're allowing. And the Ledoif and Akuma, for the law of the bent wall, which the Mishnah teaches in the 7th Sukkah of Yidayim and Aleph. And let's say you have a house, a lot of people have this on their porches, where the middle part has a hole. So let's say you have a huge skylight in the middle. So what you do is you put schach on top of that hole in the middle of the roof with kosher schach, and then the roof all around still remains, which now that's in the way between the kosher schach and the walls. So if there is kosher schach, a distance of dalet amas, it's going to be possible. But you don't see Deif and Akuma. But if let's say it's less than dalet amas, less than, let's say, around 6 feet from the wall to the kosher schach, it's going to be kosher. Why? Because we say we view the schach puzzle as if it's part of the wall, and as if the wall is bent going upwards until it gets to the kosher schach. So there's no hefsek. And that Ranachim is coming to tell us that that's we evaluated with the small amas, and it's going to be puzzle already with 20 tvachim. Because if you take the 4 amas times 5 tvachim, you get 20 tvachim. That's a stringency, because that's going to let you only a smaller amount of the Deifin Akuma. Says the Gemara. Okay, so those are 2 halachas that tell me it's a stringency. But there's also what's mentioned in the Meshech Sukkah, a similar question asked by the Mavik. A Sukkah also has dimensions it has to be. But Arba Amas, a Sukkah has to be 4 Amas, which that's still a kula, that is a leniency. Because if you're going to validate the dimensions of a Sukkah by the small Amas, that's a leniency. Rav Nachman went and said all the Amas of the Sukkah are the smaller ones. If Rav Nachman holds like Rebbe, as we're going to shortly quote, it's a leniency. The time like we're in the Brisa. Rebbe, he says, I say, Kol Sukkah She'em B'Daled Amas Adaled Amas. If the Sukkah does not have 4 Amas squared, Pasula, it's going to be invalid. Now that's a leniency. That means to say that to be kosher dimensions, you're allowing with the smaller measurements of the smaller Amas. So you said it's only as a stringency. Says the Gemara, you're right, Karabban. Rav Nachman's like Rabbanan. The Army, they have a different halachic requirement for the dimension of the sukkah. Even if the sukkah only contains your head, the majority of your body, and the table, that's going to be valid. So you don't see anything about amas regarding the meshach of the sukkah, and if it's not going to be as a leniency. Or if you want, you could actually say that Rav Nachman, the truth is lo'ilam Rebbe. He does hold like Rebbe. And this that Rav Nachman said that the amas of the sukkah, the smaller amas, is not by all the amas of the length of the sukkah, rather by the other amas, because the Roiv amas come, and this is how we answered by the previous 2. We're talking about the majority of the amas. You're right, there are going to be some exceptions, even by sukkah, that then you will do it by the 6 tvachim of the amas. Now the final case, says the Gemara, amas klein. You said in contrast, by the amas of a forbidden mixture of a vineyard of grapevines, and let's say you plant wheat and barley there, that's ba'ama ba'shisha. Ba'alachas of klein, we measure with an amma that's 6 tvachim amas. Says what halach is that you're saying it's a stringency to say it's the 6 tvachim amas? So says the Gemara, that's first of all the karachas hakarm, it's for the empty part of the vineyard, u'l'mchoil hakarm, and for the surrounding part of the vineyard. Where there, if you're going to measure it by the larger tvachim, that's going to be a stringency. That's not like when the Mishnah said it's klein. What's karachas hakarm? What's the boldness of the karm? We're going to explain shortly what it is, but what's those dimensions that you have to have as an opening if you have to plant something else in the vineyard? B'shamrim, they say esrim ba'arba amas. It's 24 amas. In other words, if the empty space in the vineyard is 24 amas, then you're allowed to plant something over there. If it's less than 24 amas, you're not allowed to plant over there. And shortly the Gemara is going to explain what is this karachas, what's this macha. They say a smaller area, sheish amas, even if it's just 16 amas in the area. Again, this is very complicated halachas of climb. These are difficult mishnayos of climb. We're mentioning it only because we're talking about that it's going to be amma b'shisha, but when we're discussing it, it's complicated halachas. So again, just notice that these are terse concepts over here. But Bissel says 16 amas. Now, what's a mechel hakarm? What's the circle of the vineyard? B'shamim, they say it's sheish amas, is 16 amas. B'shalom, they say shleim amas is 12 amas. And that says the Gemara, Ezi karachas hakarm. What is the 2 cases that we're talking about? What's the boldness of the vineyard? So that's like the picture we have over here. Kerem shachar b'emtziyasei. If you have a vineyard that the middle part is desolate, is empty, where there you have vines all around. So we're talking about that the empty space has to be 16 amas squared. And so too the halacha is if let's say it's along the entire width of the vineyard. If let's say there's only vines on the two sides, you have to have a width of 16 amas, as the Gemara explains. Because Ein Sham Shesasri Amas, if you don't have 16 amas, let's say according to Beis Hillel, Layavi Zera Lasham. You're not allowed to go ahead and bring seed over there, even in the middle amma. Now Rashi explains why that is, because you need to have 4 amas on the side of the vineyard, on either side. 4 amas on one side, 4 amas on the other side by the vineyard. Why? Because that's what's called avodah sakem. That's the work you do by the vineyard. As a mission teacher says his client, how much is the work you need to have by a vineyard? It's 4 amas. The reason for that is because you need to have the tools that you're bringing. Because when they would harvest, they would bring oxen and wagons, and when they would plow, they would also plow with oxen. So therefore, that has the halachic status where you have to work it as the vineyard itself. In other words, if you're trying to make a distance from the vineyard, this area, this space, you have to consider another 4 amas for it to be considered as part of the extension of the vineyard, because you need space for the oxen to work. Now, so therefore, that's what it's saying. It has to be 16 amas because these 4 amas and these 4 amas are part of the vineyard, because that's where you have to do the work. So you have to take away those 8. If you're left with another 8, that's 8 and 8 is 16, besides the 4 on either side, then the middle 8 amas, if you split half this way and half this way, you'll have 4 amas, each one that's distinct by itself. That's not nullified to the vineyard, and therefore you're allowed to plant it. But if it be less than 8 amas in the middle, you would say, okay, half here, and then you don't have 4 amas in its own makom chashuv, and therefore it's going to be nullified to the vineyard. According to Beis Shammai, a field's not significant unless it's 8 amas. So therefore he also has to be 24 amas. 4 for the avodah saker on either side, and then you have to have 16 remaining because you took off from the 24, 8 on each side, 4 on each side, which leaves you with 16. Then you have 8 over here and 8 over here, which then that's a field that's not going to be nullified. Or another interpretation is that Beis Shammai holds that the avodah saker has to be 8 amas. It's not enough to do work with just 4 amas. You would have to have 8 amas. That's 8 and 8 is 16, and therefore you would have to then remain with 4 and 4, which would be 8, which would be 24. But either way, that's the machlekes that they have regarding that. Now, but let's say let's say there was 16 amas. Then let's look at the avodasi. Then we give them 4 amas on each side to do the avodah. There's a rest and then you go ahead and plant the rest, which is the middle 8 amas, which you could go ahead and split that into 2, so it's not nullified to either side that you have over here in the picture. It's not going to be nullified because you're going to have over here 4 amas for itself, because if it was less than 8 amas, you would say that, okay, this half is part of this and this half is part of that, would be nullified. Now, what's this mochela kerem? That's being kerem legeda, that's between a vineyard and a wall. That's what we're calling, the reason why it's called mochela kerem, because mochela is like a circle, which usually the wall of the field goes all the way around. Here we're only showing you half of that, but it's all the way around the vineyard is where you're going to go ahead and plant between the wall of the vineyard and the vineyard itself. So that was saying, Ein Sham Shteim Esrei Am, if you don't have 12 Amma, according to Beis Hillel, Lo Yavi Zer L'Sham, you're not allowed to bring seed over there, because, again, like we said, you need to have 4 Ammas that's part of the vineyard for the Avodah Saker, and then you have 4 Ammas that is considered part of the wall, because no one plants 4 Ammas within the wall, because it's going to weaken the wall. So that part you're definitely not planting. And then you have the middle 4 Ammas. That's why we're saying there's 12 Ammas, because 4 Ammas is for the planting of the vineyard, 4 Ammas for the wall, and the middle 4 Ammas. If there's 4 Ammas, then it's significant. If not, it's going to be bottled to the Karen. Now, as Rashi explains, here you don't need to have 16 amas because the Isser is only on one side, meaning the vineyard's only one side, you have to leave over Avodah Saker, and the wall is just the wall, but you don't have to leave over any more space for that. That's how the Gemara explains later on the Psat Gimel Menav. On that, Rav Nachman's coming to tell us, and again, this is the punchline in case you drifted off till now. Rav Nachman says that these amas are the larger amas, are the 6 Tvachim amas, because that's the stringency. In other words, we don't let you plant over here, when we're telling you how many amas has to be, it's the larger amas. The small amas would be leniency, so it's the larger amas that's the stringency that we say you have to have by the halach of Klein. Where Hayusham Shteim Esrei Amma, if there was 12 amas according to Beis Hillel, then Noisim Lekei Avodah, then we give you the avodah of 4 amas to work the karen over here, and B'Zariyas Hashar, and then you can plant the rest. That's the halacha of the Amma Bashesh, that's a stringency by the laws of Klein. But the Gemara asks now, as we had asked regarding the other cases. But there's still the grapevine that's rutuf and that's contiguous, which you have the rows of the grapevine very close to each other, which are more than the distance that the Chacham gave that's supposed to be between each and every row, which is ba'ar ba'amas. If, let's say, the distance of 4 amas, if you don't have the distance of 4 amas, it's not going to be a vineyard, because you don't have the space that you have to go between each and every row, and therefore actually what happens then, since it's not a vineyard, you're allowed to plant other seeds over there according to Rabbi Shimon, because it's not a karen. Now, regarding those amas, it comes out that the halacha of Rav Nachman is dilakul, is a leniency, Because if you have 4 small amas, you're really going to say that it's not a kerem until you have the large ones. You told me that to be considered a kerem has to be dalet amas. So that comes out, that's a leniency if you're saying that it's the large ones, because it's not a kerem yet. It's not like Luna Mishnah said this client that says, kerem hanatu al pachis ma'arba amas. So we have a vineyard that's planted less than the area of dalet amas, meaning you don't have between each and every row dalet amas. So Rabbi Shimon says, ain't a kerem, it's not a vineyard, you're allowed to plant over there. But they say it is a kerem. Why? Because varaynis and tzoyin, this again, each one is a complicated concept, but you view the middle rows that are planted between the space, which is really supposed to be between the rows, kilo inim, as if they're not there. But one thing is, you see, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's a leniency, because you're telling me that if it doesn't have the dimensions of an area of 4 amas, it's not going to be a valid kerem. It's not a kerem, you're allowed to plant other things over there. So that's a leniency, because you're saying it has to be only the bigger amas, which therefore if it's the smaller ones, it's still going to be valid. So the Gemara, yeah, but Rav Nachman, he holds Kiraban, like Rabban and Dami, that they say Havakam, that it would be a vineyard, and therefore it doesn't mention the halacha of amas by climb regarding the laws of Ritzufim, because the Ritzufim is only halacha regarding Reb Shimon. He said, it's not going to be a kerem. Rabban don't have that halacha, they say we view it as if it's not there. So therefore there is no such halacha, and therefore there is no leniency. If you want, you could say another interpretation, like we said regarding the other cases. Lo'elam Reb Shimon, should do like Reb Shimon. V'roiv amas come to the majority of amas. You're right. There are some exceptions. Most of the amas of the Klayim is by the larger amas, but there are some that we have to say is a stringency regarding the smaller ones, regarding this halacha that we just said regarding Tzufim. Now that was all Abaye in the name of Rav Nachman. We're just going to finish with the last line. Rav Mishmit Rav Nachman, he disagrees with what his version of Nachman was. He says that actually kol amas, all the amas, ba'ama bash shisha, they're all 6 tvachim amas. Ella, so what's the difference between Klayim and the Maveh and Sukkah? Is halalum, regarding the amas of Klayim, soichekos. Those are wider tvachim. Meaning to say that you measure them as a bigger, as a stringency, like some Gemaras have it from the Aruch, that the fingers are a little bit looser. Like someone who smiles, his lips start to part, but someone who's depressed, they're very tightly pressed together. So we're just saying that those are wider, v'halalu, and these of the Sukkah and the Maveh are tight. Therefore, yeah, we're going to say stringency on either one, but not that we're changing and saying that 6 tvachim amas and 5 tvachim. They're all 6 tvachim amas. The only difference is that we're going to say a stringency on either one. That here we're going to do it a little bit looser, here we're going to do it a little bit tighter, because that's going to come out that halachic stringency. Something to discuss in today's daf and Shabbos Daf Gimel, a complicated daf. We said, we continue from the previous daf, according to Rav, that learns out the height of the Mavoi up until 20 amas from the entryway of the Heichel. We said if that's the case, that a malter should not help. Why? Because the Heichel itself had that malter, and it was only up until 20 amas. And the Gemara says Heichel seemingly should have the same thing as the Ulam, which had a malterais. So then this that we say that it does help, says the Gemara, that was not Rav. You're right, it's a Bryce, according to Rav, it's not going to help. And Rav holds that it's a machlekes tanoim, and that depends if you learn it out from the Heichel or not. Then the Gemara says not really true. Nachman Yitzchak says if without Rav you could say that it's actually not a machlekes tanoim. This that it says that it's in the Bryce in the previous stop that if it's more than the opening of the Heichel, that was just a simon. But really the truth is everyone holds that it's going to be not learned out from the Heichel, and the reason is because the halacha is based on the halacha of Heker, and therefore Amaltra is going to be effective even higher than 20 amas according to everyone. So if that's the case, the way Rav Nachman Yitzchak explained, then according to the one who says it's going to be invalid higher than 20 amas, it's not because you learn it from the Heichel, it's because of Heker. So then why do we have this machlekes 2 times, one regarding Sukkah, one regarding Mavoi, is if they're both regarding the same idea about Heker, if you hold like Rabbah, is because by Sukkah you would think it's going to be kosher because you're sitting, and by Mavoi you would think that it would be possible because you're walking, that we have to say according to either interpretations, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan, that either one's going to be kosher or apostle. We said, what is this amalta that we were discussing? Either it's these nests, or it's these long cedar poles, which for sure if you hold that, then for sure you hold Keen is going to be kosher, because that's a milsid de tmiya that people will look at and they wonder and say, oh, they're for sure going to look at that. And again, it's not because the poles are very long, because if that would be the case, then sukkah should also be kosher above 20 amas. Rather, it's because it's chashav, so therefore there's a color, and therefore people will notice it. We said an interesting case of, let's say, some of the beam or some of the schach, some of it is within 20 and some of it is above. What's the halacha? So you have 2 opposite interpretations. Either by Maveh it's going to be kosher, and by sukkah it's going to be pasul. And the reason can't be because of Kleish, because then you say by both, and it can't be because of Nasan, you should say by both. Rather, by Maveh it's kosher because there's the public, so they'll remind each other. Or because it's rabbinic, so we weren't stringent. And whereas by Sukkah it's going to be possible because it's an individual, he's not going to remember, or because the rice is more stringent. Then we had an opposite interpretation. No, by Mava it's possible, Sukkah is going to be kosher. Why by Mava it's possible? Because Kiddush debate should be when you have partners, no one's going to remember. Everyone's going to say he's going to do it. So therefore they were stringent. Or because it's rabbinic, so actually it needs to be strengthened. Whereas by Sukkah it's going to be kosher because the individual, he will pay attention, he'll make sure he's responsible. Or because it's the Raisa, it does not have to be supported, and therefore that's why it's going to be kosher. La halacha, we said it's a machlekes what the halacha is by the case of Mavli and Sukkah, if it's mixes toich and mixes lamala. So either that both are possible or both are going to be kosher. The one that says kosher makes sense because it's the halal, the ear space that we learned that has to be within 20 amas. And actually, as we learned in the Brisa that we learned from the Heichel itself was the ear space of 20 amas. I learned in the Brisa that says that you put the pole within 20 amas and below. So you see the pole itself has to be within, not just the ear space. And then we say, no, lamata means to say that even when we're talking about lamata, regarding the minimum height, that's just saying that that airspace has to be 10 tvachim. It can't be that you have the pole within 10 tvachim. Then we had a machlekes in the name of Rav Nachman. Abaye was the first version that he said that the amma by sukkah and the amma mavoi, there it's 5 tvachim amas, where that's a stringency. By mavoi, it's for the height, that the 20 amas. And regarding the pirts of the mavoi, that's going to be a pirts even by the smaller ones. And what's with the meshach of the mavoi? That's there you see it's going to be as a leniency. No, that's either dal tfachim, not dal amas, or talking about roiv amas kamar. Then we said, but whereas the amas of kalayim, that's the 6 tfachim amas. Well, first out of the sukkah, we said that that's going to be a stringency with the 5 tfachim amas, because that's talking about the height also. It's possible 20 amas, the smaller amas, and by different akuma. And what's with the meshach sukkah? Either holy drabana, holy reishad rubai, or we're talking about roiv amas kamar. And you're right, sometimes you will have to say the 6 tvachim amas. And what's with that of Klaim? So he said the reason why that's the 6 tvachim amas is because it's talking about the karachas and the machayil of the karam, which are the bold areas, meaning the empty space in the vineyard, which we brought machlekes b'sham hill what those measurements actually are. But when you measure with the larger ones, that's going to be stringent because that's more space that you need to be able to plant something else over there. I just dalacha b'tzufim that has to be dalan amas, which is going to be leniency. Oh, either you hold like Rabbanan that they say that it is going to be a karam because they view it as if it's not there. Or you're right, you're going like Shema, we're talking about the majority of the amas, but you're right, sometimes you'll have to say the 5 tvachim amas, which are going to be a stringency. Rava said, no, he had a different version of Nachman. He said that actually all amas are the 6 tvachim amas. Rather, by Mava and Sukkah, that's where it's going to be the tighter ones. And by Klaim, it's going to be the wider ones, again, because that's going to be the stringency. Thank you to Anytime for hosting us.